The last time the air over New York City was this hot, 5,000 feet up, the year was 1956. That air mass is moving back in this week, and it is not arriving alone. One stalled ridge of high pressure is about to deliver record heat to 100 million people and spin up rounds of violent storms along its edge at the same time, timed almost exactly to the 4th of July. By the end, you'll know why it won't break and what to watch as it does. 2 mornings ago, just after 6 o'clock, a cluster of thunderstorms over central South Dakota produced a wind gust of roughly 131 miles per hour. That is not a typo, and it was not a tornado. It was a straight-line downburst, a wall of air driven straight down out of a collapsing storm and then outward across the ground. And it hit with the wind speed of a strong EF3 tornado. It tore down a line of industrial wind turbines, snapping towers built to survive decades of prairie weather. No one was hurt. But here is the part that should get your attention. That gust happened before the pattern responsible for it had even fully matured. The air mass over the middle of this country is loaded with energy, and it is only now getting started. What is unfolding across the central and eastern United States right now is not a single weather event. It is one stalled, self-reinforcing pattern that is about to do 2 destructive things at the same time. It is going to bake more than 100 million people under record, sleepless heat, and along its northern edge, day after day, it is going to spin up rounds of violent storms like the one that flattened those turbines. Both of those threats come from the same source, and that source is locking into place almost exactly over the 4th of July, the single busiest outdoor holiday of the American summer. At the center of it is a heat dome, a massive ridge of high pressure building across the eastern half of the country and anchored over the Tennessee and Ohio valleys. Think of it as a mountain of warm air sitting on top of the map, refusing to budge. To the north, over central Canada near Manitoba, sits a large area of low pressure, and the contrast between those two systems, the high pressure to the south, the low pressure to the north, has opened a corridor of strong wind flowing up from the southwest, threaded right between them. That corridor is the engine of this entire story, and everything that follows comes out of it. Picture that flow as a conveyor belt running from the Gulf of Mexico straight up into the middle of the country. It is doing 2 jobs at once. The first job is heat. It drags hot, humid air northward and shoves it underneath the ridge where it has nowhere to go. The second job is moisture. It pulls Gulf of Mexico water vapor along with it, raising dew points into the 70s and turning the air thick and tropical across states that are nowhere near the coast. Underneath the ridge itself, a second mechanism takes over, and this is the part most people never hear explained. Inside a strong dome of high pressure, the air is not rising, it is sinking. As that air sinks, it compresses, and compressing air heats up. Sinking air also dries out the sky, burning off clouds and clearing the way for relentless, direct sunshine on the ground below. So you get a lid. The dome traps the heat the conveyor belt delivers. The sinking air adds even more heat on top of it, and the cloudless sky lets the sun hammer the surface hour after hour. Each day the ground bakes a little hotter, and each day the air underneath the lid has less and less ability to cool off. That is why a heat dome does not just bring one hot afternoon. It builds, and it compounds, and it gets worse the longer it sits. It is worth understanding why the wind keeps blowing in the first place, because that is what makes the dome a long-term threat instead of a one-day spike. Air does not move on its own. It moves from high pressure toward low pressure, and the bigger the contrast between the two, the harder it blows. With a strong high parked over the eastern states and that low anchored up over Manitoba, the gap between them stays wide and the conveyor keeps running hour after hour, feeding the dome a constant supply of heat and humidity from the south. As long as both of those systems hold their positions, the belt does not shut off. And right now, the models keep both of them locked in place for days. There's a flip side to the dome worth mentioning, because it shows just how much of the country one pattern can touch. On the dry western underbelly of the same ridge, across the Colorado high country and parts of Utah, the air is doing the opposite of humid. Relative humidity is crashing into the single digits, as low as 8 to 12%, with gusty winds raking terrain that has not seen rain. That is textbook fire weather, and red flag warnings have gone up to match it. So the same ridge that is drowning the Midwest in tropical moisture is wringing the Southwest bone dry. One pattern, opposite extremes, depending on which side of the dome you happen to live on. And this one is built to sit. The Weather Prediction Center, the federal office that issues the nation's extended forecasts, described what is coming in unusually blunt language. They called it a significant, dangerous, and record-breaking heat wave, expected to last into the following weekend across the central and eastern United States. Forecasters do not reach for the word dangerous casually. When the language in an official discussion gets that direct, it means the models are showing something they want the public to take seriously. Let me give you the numbers, because the numbers are where this stops being an ordinary summer. Across more than a dozen states, the heat index, the feels-like temperature that combines heat and humidity, is forecast to climb between 105 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. In Minneapolis, around 107. In St. Louis, near 110. In Detroit, around 110. In Nashville, 108, climbing toward 111. In Memphis, near 109. In Jackson, Mississippi, around 111. Even Boston is looking at a feels-like value near 107. And the National Weather Service's blended forecast model pushed one number as high as 116 degrees on Friday near Fredericksburg, Virginia. The peak is forecast for Thursday and Friday, July 2nd and 3rd, and it spills straight into the holiday weekend. Widespread daily record highs are likely into the 90s and low 100s. And in some places, all-time record temperatures could be challenged. Not records for the date, but the hottest readings ever observed at those locations, period. Here is the single number that tells you how rare this is. Forecasters watch the temperature about 5,000 feet up in the atmosphere, at a level they call 850 millibars, because it strips away the noise at the surface and shows the raw heat of the air mass itself. Over the New York City area, that temperature is forecast to reach 24 to 25 degrees Celsius on Thursday and Friday. The last time the forecast office there recorded a value over 24 degrees at that level was the year 1956. That is roughly a 70-year benchmark. The air mass moving in is, by that measure, something the region has not felt in the better part of a lifetime. And that number does not come from a thermometer in a parking lot that someone could argue about. It comes from weather balloons launched into the upper air. The Northeast is being pulled into this too, which is part of what makes the event so unusual. Heat domes this intense usually center on the south and the plains, not the coastal cities of the Northeast. The Boston Forecast Office upgraded an extreme heat watch to an excessive heat warning for most of southern New England, with afternoon heat indices forecast in the range of 98 to 112 degrees and little relief overnight. When a forecaster escalates from a watch to a warning, that is not a formality. It means they have gone from believing dangerous heat is possible to believing it is now likely, and they want people to act. The scale of who is affected is just as striking. As of yesterday morning, there were 342 active National Weather Service alerts across the country. 42 of them were extreme heat warnings. 22 were extreme heat watches. 53 were heat advisories. And that count was taken before the heat had peaked. The most dangerous days were still ahead of it. If you take one thing from this, let it be this. The most dangerous part of this event is not the afternoon high. It is the night. Across much of the affected region, overnight low temperatures are forecast to stay in the mid-70s, and in many cities they will not drop below 80 degrees at all. Numerous record-high minimum temperatures are expected, and a record-high minimum is exactly what it sounds like, the warmest a night has ever failed to cool down to. Forecasters keep flagging this above everything else, and there's a hard physiological reason why. The human body survives heat by cooling off, and it does most of that recovery at night. When the sun goes down and the air drops into the comfortable range, your core temperature resets, your heart rate settles, and your body banks enough relief to face the next day. Take that away. Keep the air at 80 degrees and thick with humidity all night long, and the body never recovers. The heat strain just accumulates, hour over hour, day after day, until something gives. This is why the deadliest heat waves in history are defined not by their record highs, but by their record warm nights. The afternoon is what you feel. The night is what actually hurts you. That distinction is not theoretical, and we have watched it play out before. We will come back to exactly what warm nights have done to American cities in the past, because it reframes everything about how to read a forecast like this one. The obvious question is why this pattern won't just move along the way summer ridges usually do. Most heat waves build over a few days, and then break as the next system pushes them east. This one is forecast to lock in place for the better part of a week to 10 days. So what is holding it? The answer is up in the jet stream, the river of fast wind that steers weather systems around the northern hemisphere. Normally, the jet flows in long, rolling waves that progress steadily from west to east, and that eastward march is what keeps weather moving. But sometimes, the jet develops enormous north and south meanders, big looping waves that scientists call Rossby waves, and sometimes those waves stop progressing. They stall. And when the jet stalls with a northward bulge over the eastern United States, the ridge underneath that bulge has nothing to push it along. It just sits there, holding the dome in place and holding the storm track pinned to its edge. It is the same family of stuck, blocking patterns behind the most stubborn heat events on record. There is an active scientific debate about why these stalls may be happening more often, and I want to be careful to label it as exactly that. Debate, not settled fact. Some researchers hypothesize that because the Arctic is warming faster than the mid-latitudes, The temperature difference that powers the jet stream is shrinking, leaving the jet weaker, wavier, and more prone to getting stuck. Other scientists are not convinced the link is that simple. It is a genuinely open question, and you should be suspicious of anyone who tells you it is closed in either direction. What is not in question is the role of the warmed background state the pattern is operating in. The mechanics of this ridge are completely natural. Ridges and stuck patterns have always happened, but the air today starts out warmer and holds more moisture than the same pattern would have decades ago. There is a basic law of physics here. For every 1 degree Celsius of warming, the atmosphere can hold about 7% more water vapor. More water vapor means higher dew points, which means higher heat index values and stickier, more dangerous nights. It also means more fuel packed into every thunderstorm that fires along the dome's edge. The pattern is natural. The amplitude, the records, the dew points, the sleepless nights, is being pushed higher. And that amplitude is what turns the dome's edge into the second half of this story. Forecasters have a name for what happens on the northern rim of a heat dome. They call it a ring of fire. Storms riding around the periphery of the ridge like sparks circling a flame. And it is not a metaphor for danger in general. It is a precise description of geography. The dome's lid suppresses storms everywhere underneath it, but right along its edge, where the hot air meets the cooler air to the north, the lid weakens just enough for air to punch upward. That narrow boundary is where the disturbances fire, one after another, day after day. The storms exist because of where the heat is. They are the visible outline of the dome, and this rim is loaded. The Storm Prediction Center has been hanging severe weather risk areas across the plains, the Midwest, and the Great Lakes for days. The main threat is wind, severe gusts of 60 to 85 miles per hour as storms collapse into fast-moving lines and slam downbursts into the surface. But it does not stop at wind. Some of these storms are capable of hail 2 to 2.5 inches across, large enough to total a car or punch through a roof. And in the worst corridors, the rotation needed for tornadoes is on the table too. What loads these storms is the same heat and moisture feeding the dome. Forecasters measure the fuel as instability, essentially how much energy is available for air to rise explosively once it gets a push. And across the Midwest and Great Lakes, that fuel gauge is running high, in places 3 to 5 times what you would see on an ordinary stormy afternoon. When a storm taps into an atmosphere that primed, the updraft is violent, and the downdraft that follows can be even worse. That is the downburst again. Rain-cooled air gets dragged downward, accelerates, hits the ground, and blasts outward in a straight line. It is a different beast from a tornado, which is a rotating column, but at 131 miles per hour, the damage on the ground looks much the same. That is exactly what happened in South Dakota. The day-by-day march is relentless. Today, the threat focuses across the northern plains near Sioux Falls and Minneapolis. Tomorrow, Thursday, the most significant day, the risk sharpens across the northern and central plains, from Rapid City toward Des Moines, with the potential for strong tornadoes near Watertown, Sioux Falls, and Pierre. A measure forecasters use called the significant tornado parameter, essentially a combined gauge of how primed the atmosphere is for strong tornadoes, is forecast to climb into the 2 to 5 range in pockets south of Minneapolis. Values that high mean any storm that gets its act together at the surface could put down a serious tornado. Then the lines of storms roll into Iowa, Milwaukee, and Chicago Thursday night into Friday, with more severe weather possible, Friday and even on the 4th of July itself. And remember those wind turbines in South Dakota. That 131-mile-per-hour gust was the rim of this dome firing a warning shot before the pattern even peaked. The same energy that toppled steel towers 2 mornings ago is the energy now stacking up along hundreds of miles of that boundary, aimed at the heart of the holiday week. Now bring it back to the people under the dome, because this is where the records turn into consequences. Earlier I said the warm nights are the real danger, and history makes that case better than any forecast can. In the summer of 1995, a heat wave settled over Chicago. The thing that made it a catastrophe was not a single record-shattering afternoon. It was that the nights would not cool down, and people, especially the elderly and the isolated, never got the overnight relief their bodies needed. Roughly 739 people died. More recently, in 2021, a heat dome, very much like this one in its mechanics, locked over the Pacific Northwest, a region built for mild summers with few air conditioners. The village of Lytton in British Columbia hit 49.6 degrees Celsius, that is 121.3 degrees Fahrenheit, before it burned. Hundreds of people died across the region in an event so extreme that attribution scientists called it something on the order of a 1-in-1,000-year heat wave. The cities under this dome are not facing numbers that extreme, but the mechanism that kills is the same one, and it has a name worth understanding: the wet bulb temperature. It is the temperature a thermometer reads when it is wrapped in a wet cloth and cooled by evaporation. In other words, it measures how well your sweat can actually cool you. When the air is dry, sweat evaporates fast and you stay cool. When the air is thick with humidity, sweat just sits on your skin and stops working. The often cited theoretical limit of human survival is a wet bulb temperature of 35 degrees Celsius, though more recent real-world research suggests the true limit for healthy young adults is lower, closer to 30 or 31 degrees, and lower still for the elderly and the sick. The cities in this dome are nowhere near that ceiling, but the principle is exactly why a humid 110-degree heat index with a night that never drops below 80 is genuinely dangerous and not just uncomfortable. The people most at risk are the ones easiest to overlook: older adults whose bodies regulate temperature less efficiently, people on certain medications, anyone without reliable air conditioning, and those who live alone with no one to check on them. That last factor, isolation, was one of the quiet drivers of the Chicago death toll, and it is the reason public health officials spend these events urging people to check on elderly neighbors and relatives. There is also a strain on the system itself. When tens of millions of air conditioners run flat out for days without the overnight break that normally lets the grid recover, electricity demand climbs toward records, and the risk of localized power failures rises, at the exact moment losing power becomes most dangerous. Layer on top of that the calendar. This peaks on a holiday weekend, when people are outside for parades, cookouts, ball games, and fireworks, exactly when the heat is at its worst and the body's defenses are already worn down. The exposure and the danger are scheduled to collide. So where does this go from here? The ridge is forecast to hold nearly stationary through midweek, then begin to nudge east toward the mid-Atlantic later in the week, with energy from the west finally working into the Great Lakes and starting to break the dome down around Sunday. The relief, when it comes, will spread from west to east, but it does not arrive everywhere at once, and the most dangerous days, Thursday and Friday into the 4th, come first. When a stuck pattern like this finally lets go, the trapped energy does not just vanish. It gets released, often through one more round of strong storms as the boundary sweeps through. So the end of the heat may not be quiet. Watch for the heat to peak. Thursday and Friday, watch the storm threat ride the northern rim straight through the holiday, and watch the overnight low temperatures as closely as the afternoon highs, because that is the number that tells you whether the night is giving people a break or taking one away. And before anyone tells you this is something it is not, a heat dome is not engineered by any agency or machine, and it has nothing to do with the solar flare that happened to go off this week. The energy locked into a continental ridge dwarfs anything human technology could build or steer by an almost unimaginable margin. The records are measured by thousands of independent stations, balloons, and satellites that all agree. And the sun's flares deposit their energy high in the upper atmosphere and out in space, not in the lower atmosphere weather that makes a heat wave. This pattern is natural in its mechanism. What is different is the amplitude. The records, the dew points, the sleepless nights, running hotter on a warmed baseline. The deeper question this leaves behind is the one forecasters are quietly circling. Ordinary summer ridges come and go in a few days. This one is built to stand for 10. And if a stalled, self-reinforcing dome like this is becoming a more regular feature of the American summer rather than a rare alignment that happened to land on the 4th of July, then the way we plan for heat, the cooling centers, the warnings, the power grid, the simple assumption that the night will bring relief, may need to change faster than we are ready for. We will be tracking this one all the way through the holiday, and we will tell you what it does when it finally breaks.